All right, let's talk about the swim bait today. Let's make it simple. Swim baits is probably one of the baits that, from a distance, if you're just trying to get into swim baits, that crap can be really intimidating because you got soft plastic swim baits, big swim baits, little swim baits, one that have big boot tails, one that don't have tails at all, some of them that snake, some of them that kick, and you're like, where the crap do I start? Well, let me just kind of bring that down to some very simple, basic knowledge that you can probably wrap your mind around, get started into it, and then kind of sprawl out there to some more difficult terminology and more difficult baits when they're talking about swim baits. Listen, it's very intimidating talking about swim baits because there's so many, but to start off, you can use 3, 4, and 5-inch swim baits. You want to be real fancy, get a 6-inch swim bait. Leave all that other stuff alone. Okay, that's just a place where you can start. Now for a 3-inch swim bait, what I like to use, you've seen me, I've used it a lot, especially in the fall. You're probably thinking, all right, you got 3, 4, 5. When did I use when? What kind of hook do I use? What kind of line? Let's just run right through everything that I like to use. For my 3-inch swim bait, what I've been using right here is this is just a 3-inch Z-Man minnows. All right, I've used this all from saltwater to catching spotted bass to catching smallmouth. I have caught every species of bass on this guy right here, the 3-inch minnows. In my opinion, it is the most underrated, best 3-inch swim bait that there is. There's also another 3-inch swim bait called the Slim Swims that I like to use. This is how I'm going to rig this guy. What you can do a lot of times on a 3-inch swim bait, I'm going to use this guy on spinning gear. Spinning gear, probably anywhere as light as an 1/8 ounce sinker, as heavy as probably a 3/8 ounce sinker, 7 foot to 7 3-inch spinning rod, braid to fluorocarbon, or you can use fluorocarbon, just straight up fluorocarbon. I tend to lean more towards 10 pounds straight up fluorocarbon. I like that little bit of sponginess when I'm using a swim bait. Fish are bad about just bumping a swim bait and not really getting it. So that's going to be my rod and reel setup. 7 foot to 7.3 spinning rod with the 3-inch, 2000 series reel, 10 pound test fluorocarbon, or 20 pound test braid with anywhere between 8 to 12 pound test leader material tied with Alberto knot. That's what you can use. All right, and I tie it straight to my main line with just a Palomar knot. Now what I like to use is just you can use there's all kind of different jig heads when you're talking about a 3/8 swim bait. A round ball jig head will work, but anything that you can use from an 1/8 to probably a 3/8 works good. Just rig it in here. One thing about Elastec, if you're using Elastec, there's a little cavity in here that helps you rig this guy. If you miss the cavity in your rigging, take it off and rig it again. That's the good thing about Elastec. It's not like you're going to wear out the plastic. So if I get it up on there and it's not straight, like that's a little bit, I rigged it a little bit too far back, take it off. Take it off and do it again. It doesn't matter. You can rig this thing 6 times in a row and you don't ruin the plastic like how you can with traditional plastic. See, I rigged it too far to the head that time. If I don't get it right, if I don't get it exactly like how I want it, I just keep doing it until I do it. Do it like I need. And what I'm going to do, this is just a 3/8 ounce jig head here with a light wire hook on a 3-inch. I like the light wire. You guys can use a round ball. You can use a trout eye jig head. It really depends on what I'm fishing for and the pound test line that I use. This is another one that I use right here. If I can get it out without getting my hand stuck. Actually, it's right here. You can use a round ball jig head just like that one. That's just got a 90-degree line tie, a light wire hook. I like the light wire hook because I'm using light line and I don't want to bend that hook out. This one is a little bit in the medium, and medium between a light and a heavy gauge, just somewhere in between there. But the thing to remember when you're rigging your Elastec over the barb, you can see there's a plastic keeper right there on the back side of this hook. Take him up, pick him up, and pull it up and over the keeper. Pull it up and over. Let that plastic rest down on the keeper like a rubber band. So that's my 3-inch setup. The 3-inch setup can be fished just like this, standalone swim bait, just like this with a line tie. Throw it out, reel it back to the boat real slow. You can fish it like that. You also can take, this is what I like about simplifying these guys to 3, 4, 5-inch swim baits. I can take this same swim bait, pull out my spinnerbait box out of my boat, and then I can rig it on the back of a spinnerbait. Let's show you. I do it all the time. I can go in my spinnerbait box. I can do the same thing with a 4-inch as well. This is why I think, you know, when we talk about swim baits, we tend to think about them as standalone baits. But I can take a spinnerbait like this, a 3/8 ounce power finesse spinnerbait, sling blades, and I can use this same swim bait as a standalone or as a spinnerbait trailer. Okay, you rig him up on there. Now I got a spinnerbait trailer. So now you've just kind of made you got 3 purposes for one bait: standalone, spinnerbait, and guess what else? A chatterbait trailer as well. You can do the same thing with the 3 or the 4-inch swim baits there. So keep in mind, you know, that's why I like to keep it simple. I don't even have anything other than 3, 4, 5-inch swim baits in my boat. There's one time of the year, which is post-spawn, where I'll use some of the bigger ones, but it's going to be 3, 4, 5-inch swim baits. And then when I like to use this, the 3s and the 4s, when I like to use this, when I've noticed they work best is during the pre-spawn and fall time of the year. Don't have a lot of luck with this size swim baits in the summertime, in the springtime. I think they feed on a lot bigger bait that time of year, and that's when the 4, the 5s, and even the 6s sometimes do best. But this guy's going to excel best when your fish are in that pre-spawn mode, when the water temperatures are cold. It seems like this is when this works the best. As well as the fall time. You notice in the fall time, fish tend to feed on much smaller shad. They're feeding on the previous year's shad spawn, and usually the bait fish is a lot smaller in the fall, and that's why I don't use that guy. Same thing with the 4-inch. We'll look at a 4-inch swim bait. The one that I like to use the most is just a diesel minnows from Z-Man. This is a 4-inch swim bait. This color right here is called Purple Death. Again, now Purple Death, you can throw that as a standalone swim bait on a jig head just like this. Take that same bait. It can be a spinnerbait trailer if I need just a little bit bigger profile. I can throw it just like that right there. God, that looks so good. I've caught a lot of fish on this setup in saltwater. I've caught them on spotted bass. I've caught them in New York. I've caught them in Florida on this same setup. That's what fish are feeding on most of the time, is about a 4-inch shad, just like that. It looks like the prey fish that fish eat. So that's why they look and why they work so well, is because it's the exact same size as what fish are actually feeding on. Take that chatterbait trailer, standalone swim bait, standalone on a jig head. You can also Texas rig this guy and throw it out and just kind of reel it along the top or just under the surface. Guess what else you can use it for? A swim jig trailer. There's a lot of different purposes just for this 4-inch swim bait, so that's why I like to use this guy, and I keep these in my boat. A lot of different purposes, works as an additional asset to other baits: spinner baits, chatterbaits, swim jigs, Texas rigs. You can rig it on a jig head. You can rig it on a keel weighted hook and use it as a topwater. There's just a lot of different things that you can do with the 4-inch swim bait, just like you can with the 3-inch swim bait. This guy is one I'm going to be using primarily during the pre-spawn periods of the year. When I'm using it as a trailer, obviously that can be just about any time of the year, but if I'm going to use it as a standalone swim bait, just as you see it here, that's probably going to be during the pre-spawn, cooler water temperatures, or in the fall time when they're starting to feed on smaller shad. Now the other one we have here is, well, there's 2 more that I have here I want to talk to you about. A 5-inch swim bait, which is the one what I'm using right now. Obviously, right now we're having more post-spawn fish than we're even having spawn fish. That's when I like to use the bigger swim baits, the 5 or the 6s. I will throw the 6s occasionally too, but it's a very small window on some of these smaller, bigger baits, I feel like. Now, you talk to some of the swim bait gurus, they may tell you something different, but for me, there's a smaller window for getting numbers of bites on, you know, the window gets smaller the bigger your bait gets. For the 3s, I can catch them more times of the year than I can the 4s. And the 4s, the window gets a little smaller. When you get to 5s, it gets a little smaller. When you get to the big guys like the 6s, the 5s and 6s, I feel like the window gets a little bit smaller. You know, with the 5, 5 is going to be primarily for me during the post-spawn. When fish are on the bed, they don't eat. Their sole purpose is to protect the bed, the nest, the eggs, while they're hatching, and the fry. Their sole purpose is to protect. They eat something that's probably trying to eat them or eat the hatch. So they don't eat much. But when they leave the bed, their sole purpose in life is to do nothing but eat. So in my area of the country, from about April until June, all they want to do is eat all the time. So they eat bigger profile baits during the late spring and summer periods, early summer periods. So that's when I want to pull out the 5-inch diesel minnows. I'm going to rig that guy up. Now you can use this guy as like a chatterbait trailer. I've seen guys use a 6-inch as a chatterbait trailer, but primarily this is going to be a standalone bait. You're going to use a much bigger jig head. You know, I would suggest in the 5 and the 6 at least a 1/2 ounce jig head. No matter how shallow you're fishing, it seems like this 5 and the 1/2 ounce works best. What I like about this guy, now I can reel this guy around points. I can also reel this guy around like docks. There's a lot of different stuff that I can do. You see, this is a screw lock jig head, and a lot of times people tell you that elastic does not work on a screw lock. Well, I'm about to show you that it does, good buddy. You just have to get it started. Once you have a hole started with the elastic, it can be a little bit more of a booger to rig, but screw locks absolutely 100% do work on elastic, but you just have to have a hole started first. Get one list. You see that guy butts up here really good. Will not come back down off the hook shank here. And I'm going to use this during the post spawn with fish are feeding on bigger shad. I can skip it. This is the thing about the 5-inch. It skips really good. If I want to put that in the shade line of a dock or something like that, it skips really good. Now we have, where I live, we have what's called a herring spawn, which is basically our shad spawn. We really, you know, you don't hear much about the threadfin shad spawn here, but you hear a lot about the herring spawn. And the herring is a bigger, larger profile bait. And that's when I'm going to use the bigger baits like this guy right here. This is a 6-inch Z-Man swimmers. So it's not a hollow belly, but it's a split belly swim bait. I like this primarily during this post spawn too. This guy is going to be primarily a heavy hook jig head, 1/2 ounce to a 3/4, or maybe even a 1 ounce. You guys can use it on ledges. You can use it, doesn't skip that well, but you could, you know, for a really accomplished angler, you could skip this around docks. But where I like to use it is on those long clay points that I know that the herring are spawning on. You throw that guy out there on the points and just slow reel it back, let it dig down into the mud. And this guy works really good. Now, of course, with elastic, it can be a little bit tricky to rig. So what I'll do is I'll rig it up on the hook and just grab it and pull it. You can be really aggressive with it. Pull it up and over. Make sure you pull it up and grab it and pull it over the bait keepers there. If you don't rig it right the first time, take it off and rig it again. It's elastic. You can't hurt it. So that's what I'm going to use. This jig head right here is a 1/2 ounce trout eye. I think this is actually called a redfish eye jig head right here. It has a heavier hook, heavier gauge hook for bigger line. I've got 2 setups that I like to use rod wise on these setups right here. I don't like a rod that's super stiff, but I don't want something that's so limber that I can't really throw the bait comfortably on. What I like to use is 20-pound test fluorocarbon on the 4, or actually the 5 and the 6-inch swimmers. I'm sorry. So the bigger ones, I'm going to use a 20-pound test fluorocarbon. This is a 7.3 heavy action favorite rush with a Lew's Tournament Pro 7.5 to gear ratio reel. 20-pound test fluorocarbon pretty much in all line conditions or all weather conditions or water clarities. I'm going to use this guy. Probably I'll use the 5-inch diesel minnows over the 6-inch swimmers. It's just a little bit more versatile. I feel like you catch a few more fish on this guy. I know they'll hit the 5-inch, but they may hit the 6-inch. On both of these setups, I'm using casting gear, 20-pound test fluorocarbon, 7.3 heavy action Lew's Tournament Pro bait casting equipment here. I'm going to tie it on with a Palomar knot. We keep it simple here. Tie that guy on. And there's just about nowhere you can't fish it. Listen, when fish are in their post-spawn mode, they're feeding on shad, I guarantee you. It doesn't matter if you live in Kentucky, South Carolina, Georgia, or Oklahoma. They eat shad after they finish spawning. So swim baits are a premium time to fish. Really every time of the year, but especially during the post spawn. If you're throwing a swim bait, I guarantee you're throwing a bait that the fish will eat at that time. Now, where you put that swim bait at is a different story. This guy, you see, I've got it rigged up on a jig head, but you can put it on a kill weighted hook. You could put it Texas rig and reel it through Kissimmee grass down at Okeechobee. You could rig it on a scrounger head and throw it at Kentucky Lake. There's a lot of different ways to rig the 5-inch swim bait, but it just depends on where you need to put that bait for the time of year it is. So check it out. Make it simple with your swim baits. 3, 4, 5-inch. Start there and just kind of develop out from there as you get some confidence in the technique. And I promise you, swim baits are a great bait to use all year. Use those big ones during the post spawn, the 5, 6-inch big daddies, but predominantly if you're fishing for pre-spawn fish or during cooler water temperatures, size them down to the 3 and 4-inch models. You're gonna catch some fish. Swim baits do the job.